Okay, I've cut my patterns for my left and right port and starboard filler pieces for my cockpit floor where I've got to recore it. These are just patterns, but they'll be placed in something kind of like that, and then I'll do a third piece in the center. That allows me to get these pieces in. It goes back under toward the cockpit drains. If I don't do it with three pieces, I can't get the whole thing in and slip it up underneath the the fiberglass bottom layer that I'm trying to keep intact in some areas that I don't have access to, or at least without extreme measures. So this way I can, this will be cut out of 1/2-inch material. I'll be able to pump thickened epoxy all back up in the void, and then slide this piece of 1/2-inch, this, like I said, this is just a pattern, but I'll slide the 1/2-inch thick piece that's already been impregnated with epoxy resin, and also with thickened epoxy slathered on either side of it and all the edges and everything. And then it gets shoved into that void that I don't have good access to, or almost no access to. And with a little bit of luck, I'll have enough of the thickened epoxy in there where it will squeeze into any little voids or discrepancies and bond it all together. Then I'll do the other side the same way, and then that'll leave me that strip in the middle, which is my key piece, for reinforcing the floor under the pedestal and everything, that I'll be able to put in as a third piece. That'll just go straight up. It will slide in back a little bit, and then the front will just go straight up. And then I'll do the side two pieces first and let those cure, and then come back and do the third piece. That way I can have a stiff knee in the middle, keeping that floor area pushed up like I want it, with just a hint of a crown in it where the pedestal goes. And then as these side pieces cure, with a little bit of luck, it'll stay. And then when I put the third piece in and get it heavily, bedded with thickened epoxy down the edges and the whole surface is going up, I will put a stiff knee under that to keep it pushed up tight. Or actually, it'll probably be 3 or 4 stiff knees to keep it pushed up nice and hard against that the upper fiberglass layer to make sure it bonds to it well. And I probably will go ahead, that third piece, before I put it in, I will probably go ahead and seal it. Well, I know I will seal it all the way around with epoxy resin, all of the edges in both faces. But the bottom face, I may go ahead and put one skin of glass cloth on it before I put it up. And then I'll tape fiberglass cloth, tape the edges back to the old glass. And then I'll just grind both edges out and glass them back together like that, and then come back when it's all done and probably put a whole new layer of 1708 or something like that across that whole upper area under there to bond it all back together and tie it all back in and give it a little bit more strength. So that's the direction I think I'm going to go. Doing the 3 pieces. I think this will be my best bet as far as the maximum strength for the amount of effort and time and materials. There's other ways that it could have been done, including cutting out the top. I'm going to put a fan in here and let it run for a few days, I think, and let it circulate some air through there and try to dry it out, because I need it really dry. I want to make sure that this bonds together good. I got a fan running in here. I'm going to let it run for a few days, see if I can't get this thing dried a little faster. And also, I've got a brace across it over there, back there at the back, with a kicker up at the top. And I've put just a hint of crown. I'm sure you can't see it in this video, but I've got just a hint of crown in that upper glass skin on the cockpit floor. And then whenever I glass in my sides, I'll put that back in place and leave it along with supports, pushing up on the sides as well to keep everything pushed up nice and tight where it can bond. And then once everything cures, then I can take that the middle brace back out. I'll put my third piece in, middle piece in, and then put the brace back in under that to hold it up like I've got it. Those two pieces that are built in right there and there, that's the back support for the fuel tank. But on the other side of it, it's also the stops for the rudder shaft quadrant when it turns. That's like stops for the rudder, so it doesn't turn further than it should. So it's dual purpose. So I just set me up a little temporary table in here, covered up my cushions with some red rosin paper, put red rosin paper down on the floor and some cardboard to work off of. The little table's covered with plastic. Got all my epoxies and thickeners here, my pieces cut, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to coat these pieces of plywood core here with just regular epoxy resin, and then I'll mix up some thickened and put thickened resin on both sides and the edges and everything, and I'll squirt a little bit, best I can, of some thickened up in the slot up there where it's going to go, and then I will just push it in and get it in the best I can, and use a squeeze bag to squeeze any in I need to if any of it scrapes off or whatever. And then once I get it all in place, I've got some boards cut where I can shim it up to push that bottom skin up against it. It's nice and snug to hold it in place. I think it's dry enough. I vacuumed it out again already with the shop vac to get any last little bit of dust is out of it. Everything that came out of it felt real dry, so I feel pretty confident that it's dry enough. I've had a fan running on it for about a week, and I think it's gotten out most of the moisture out of it, so should be good. This is going to be a bit of a mess, working overhead like that and trying to force it into a slot like that. The third piece that I put in, which I'll do another day, it goes in the middle, that won't be so bad. But these two pieces that I'm fixing to put in now, they're going to be kind of messy. I'm going to get me a plastic garbage bag and put over that quadrant back there to keep anything from dripping on top of all that. Try to keep that kind of halfway clean. And then other than that, it don't really matter if it drips. It'll be on this temporary floor I've got in here. I can clean all that up later. Anyway, it's one of those things that's just messy and kind of aggravating to do, but it doesn't really take that long to do. Once it's all done and everything cleaned up, it ends up being, well, that wasn't that big a deal after all. But when it's ahead of you to do, you feel like it's a bigger deal than it is. So you do get it all over you. It's just not much way to work overhead like that, trying to squeeze things in like that. Some of us, bound to drip and get on you, so just wear gloves and wear a dust mask or whatever and try to keep it off of you the best you can and go on with it. Okay, so I've got those two side pieces epoxied in. I added some of the 407 low density filler to it to make it a little bit stickier, just to help it stay in place when I was trying to put it in here overhead. That's why it's got the reddish color. I used the colloidal silica primarily, and then added the 407 low density filler just to make it sticky and make it stay where I put it, kind of thing. So it's a combination of the two. If you use just the colloidal silica, it just wants to sag and run out everywhere, and that stiffens it up and makes it sticky and makes it stay. And then I just use some little 1x2 strips or 1x1 strips and wedged it all up nice and hard and tight. Made a little bit of a mess, but not too bad. Most of the mess is on the scrap stuff, not on the boat itself. So now once this all kicks and hardens, sets up good, I'll come back in here and I'll grind all this down, clean it all up, and grind all these edges, sand them all up real good to get a good clean bond wipe it all down good, acetone kind of thing, and then I will cut my board that goes here, and I will coat it with epoxy, and I will put 1708 cloth on the bottom side before I bring it in, and then I will, sand it good before I bring it in the boat so it can, accept more epoxy, and clean it good, get all the wax blush off of it. And then when I install it, I'll put the thickened epoxy overhead and all that, and put it back in just like I did here. Put kickers under it to hold it in place. And then once it's cured, then it's already got a layer of glass on the bottom of it. And then all I've got to do is just grind out and tape the perimeter pretty much. I will be putting, over drilling these holes up here where the pedestal and all went, steering pedestal went. And I will be doing a solid epoxy core in the immediate area of the holes, back a ½ inch, an inch, or whatever, so that I don't have anything happening in the future like it did here now. And then it should be okay. And like I said, I've got all this lifted slightly just to have just a hint of a crown in it. And then hopefully whenever I get through, that'll eliminate any possibility of any water standing around the pedestal. It'll run to the edges and back to the drains. And yeah, I made a mess in here. This is why I covered everything with red rosin paper and cardboard and plastic, because this stuff just makes a mess. It just makes a mess. When you're trying to do, I put the epoxy coating on all edges and sides of the plywood and let that stiffen just a little bit, and then I put the thickened epoxy in a heavy coat, top and bottom and all edges here, right here, and then I carried it in underneath back there and put it in place. So it's just, it's just hard to do that without making a mess. It's just hard to do it without making a mess. I use my little standoffs here so I could do all sides at one time. That works pretty good. Like I say, it drips and makes a mess, but there's sacrificial plastic right here, so whenever I get through today, I just wad all that up and throw it out, and then put a clean piece of plastic back down for the next go around. I don't usually make quite so much of a mess, but I just couldn't figure out a really good way to do this and get it in there all at one time, in a hidden area where I had to put the whole thing in at once, top and bottom, all at once. So there's that middle third piece dry fitted. So it slid back up underneath that back fiberglass lip back there about 5 inches. And then it's just flush up here where it changed over to that Clegicel or whatever it was, that foam core anyway, up here. And now I've got to go on the outside and mark all of my holes so I can pre-drill my holes oversized, so I can put an epoxy rim around all of the holes. Getting closer. This is out in the cockpit. There's where the pedestal was. I'm going to overcut that hole and epoxy the edges all the way around so there's no plywood exposed to that opening. Same way back there where the emergency tiller goes. That'll be overcut as well and edged with epoxy. These holes will be over-drilled, oversized holes with filled with epoxy and re-drilled. This hole right here, it looked like somebody had cut a hole in there to get to the sending unit on the fuel tank. I'm going to, at least for the time being, I'm going to fill this in solid and just glass over it, just do away with that. It serves no real purpose, and it was the main place that water was getting in was a plastic cap, and water was getting in primarily right there. At least it was like where the water maybe started coming in. So I'm gonna do away with that altogether. If I need to put something in later, I can, but for now I'm gonna do away with that altogether. I'm also gonna put a raised epoxy lip on the outside all the way around that hole right there. There's plenty of room inside of the pedestal housing to where it won't interfere with anything. And then if any water does try to get underneath that flange, it'll hit that raised collar and won't be able to penetrate, and it'll evaporate or run back out or whatever, but it won't be able to get inside. And then over drilling these holes and filling those with epoxy and re-drilling them, all these holes, that'll hopefully eliminate water for a long time. Sooner or later, bedding fails. I don't care what you use and how well you do it. Sooner or later, things have to be rebedded, and this boat has just been neglected for years and years, and the bedding in a lot of areas had failed. So, happened to redo. While I'm out here, I'll show you too. These cockpit drains. The area that I record goes just shy of those drains, kind of like in a quarter circle right there. So this has been, these corners back in here and here have now been recored more or less, as far back as I could get in there realistically anyway. But what I haven't done, and I'm going to do, I'm going to take out these cockpit drains, and then I'm going to take and ream out whatever plywood is left or rotten plywood is left around the perimeter of that opening, and clean that out good. And then I will pack thickened epoxy all the way around the perimeter of that hole real good. And then once it cures, re-drill my hole, and then probably put in new drains, or at least replace the gaskets on them. And I'm gonna replace the hoses and all that too on these while I'm working on it. Just trying to eliminate any and all possible problem areas while I'm working on it, while I've got this engine on all out, fuel tank out. So that's an upcoming thing I'm gonna do. And there's where I mark my holes. That's for the emergency tiller access here, and the bigger holes where I'll cut. That way all of the screw holes will be in epoxy. And then that's where the pedestal goes for mounting holes, which will be drilled oversized, about a 1-inch hole. They'll be filled in with solid with epoxy and re-drilled. And then the center hole, which is just where the cabling and wiring goes, that'll be drilled out about a 1/2 inch oversized and then filled in with epoxy around that edge. And then as well, like I said, I'm gonna put a collar on top out of epoxy, just as like a dam to keep water from being able to migrate into there if it gets underneath that flange at the bottom of the pedestal. And then these are I just used a punch to mark the center lines of my holes there. These will be drilled out about 1 inch too. So I get all that done, get everything sanded up, and then this will be ready to coat. And that's the top side here. And I set the plywood in with a little bit of, there's just a hint of crown in that plywood, which is typical. I'll turn that crown, the high side up, and that'll, push up on the floor whenever I put it in place and wedge the ends. The middle will come up tight and try to lift the floor ever so slightly, which is exactly what I want it to do if I don't have any kind of a sag. So that should be good. This will get completely encapsulated with epoxy, and then on the back side, from right here forward, it'll get a layer of like a mat that's made for epoxy resin, and then a layer of 1708 over that area. I can't put it here or it won't fit in the hole that I've got between the layers of fiberglass, but then once it's all cured, I'll come back and grind out the perimeter, and then tape it all in, and maybe even put one big piece of glass over the whole thing possibly, but probably won't need to. Just put a couple of good joints of tape, like a 3 inch and a 6 inch or something like that, around the perimeter of it to bond it back to the old fiberglass.